sorry? Are you heartfully sorry for all your sins? It doesn't matter, because now is the time for your just punishments. Hello and welcome once again to Just Punishments, the Southgate Media Group and Capes and Lunatics Sidekicks Netflix series about the Punisher. I'm your host, Charlie, the Professor Esser, and with me, as always, is my skinny rich friend.
It's Mozz.
Hey, Mozz. Great to have you. Tonight's episode, The Judas Goat. With Frank in bad shape, Micro calls on Curtis for help. Madani and Russo continue to mix business with pleasure. Lewis stands up for his rights. Director was Jeremy Webb. Our writers on this series were Steve Lightfoot, of course, gets his created by credit. Christine Boylan gets her written by. Angela LaManna is the story editor, and hardest working man in show business, Ken Christensen, as our staff writer. Okay. This episode opens in a very happy, lovely scene with the Castles and the Micro family all together.
The Liebermans.
The Liebermans, thank you, I forgot his last name. The Liebermans and the Castles together for Thanksgiving dinner. And of course, immediately you notice, hey, wait a minute, aren't the Castles dead?
Right.
And
what is Micro doing home?
Well, yeah. Well, see, that part you could almost think is real because his family is alive and he could go home. And in fact, he even makes mention of this the next episode. I believe that he might actually get to go home, and he's excited about that idea. However, in this episode, not so much.
Right. At first, I thought it was just extended family. I didn't catch that it was Frank's family as well.
Yeah, because I remember one of them saying Frank Jr.
Nice. I didn't catch that.
Right on. Was that it was Frank Jr. And I think it's his daughter has the little, which kind of freaked me out at first because when you first see the hand, I thought it was an actual hand. I thought she threw an actual hand.
Really?
Yeah, I thought he threw, it's a paper hand. And I wasn't even thinking the turkey kind of hands that kids make because they were really small. And then they start falling like leaves. And then I'm thinking, it's all these hands being thrown. It was a very disturbing thing. And then, of course, Frank is tied to the chair with the zip ties, just like he had tied Micro a few episodes back. And the fever dream kind of goes off the rails from there.
Yeah. I mean, they got pretty graphic in this episode. I was several times just like, oh my God, does it need to be this graphic?
And I think the answer is yes, Mozz. Yes, it does.
Right. No, but I mean, I'm probably immune to a lot of that, but even I was like, okay. Just looking away and being like, okay.
Yeah.
So this is intense.
It was intense. And of course, going into the intensity, we also have the surgery scene.
Right. And exactly.
You know, there was actually one thing I really liked about this is they did not force Claire into it.
That's a great point.
And I was thinking, I'm so glad that a writer was smart enough to know we don't need to put Claire in this. Now, I don't know if that was because they couldn't get Claire, couldn't afford Claire, whatever, that they didn't have the budget for her in this. But whatever reason, there was no organic way to actually have Claire be the surgeon in this.
Right.
So
and, the schedule of the actress being one thing, I'm just glad Claire Temple gets a couple of days off,
Well, yeah. I mean, honestly, I would have been happy if she had been established in the Punisher's universe. If they had brought her in earlier in the scene, in the story, maybe I could go along with that. But no. But I also really and what I liked better, in its own kind of in the way that Punisher is a bit standalone-ish, we got Curtis in here, and we find out that Curtis was a medic. And this was something that had not been established before that. We just knew that he was a soldier, he had lost his leg, but we didn't know what he did. And now we find out, he's a medic, and that actually proves handy.
Right. I like that he calls out Micro on his manipulating Frank also. Mm-hmm. Seems like it's the only person around that's looking out for Frank.
Well, not for nothing, he's the only person around looking out for any of these vets.
Well, that's true, yeah.
And you think about the young kid,
Lewis,
Lewis, Lewis is mad at him because he lost the job. With
Anvil job.
Yeah, the Anvil job. Yeah. But, the fact of the matter is, Russo knows better. And the fact of the matter is Russo didn't necessarily care if this guy was a little bit off level, because, quite frankly, he wasn't hiring this guy for nation building. He was hiring this guy to be a mercenary.
Right.
To be, to go in and to kill people, to be your basic comic book level special forces Killmonger type guy, He wasn't hiring this guy to go, dig wells and build hospitals. He was hiring this guy to be a monster. And if he was halfway there, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, he makes the point that
not just a monster. It has to be, a mercenary is a very sharp tool. It's not a blunt object, And this guy is unpredictable, and we get a lot of evidence of that. And I think it's in the next episode, maybe. But
no, it happens this episode.
Okay.
Because I double checked what all my starts and stops were this before. So
nice.
Now I know. This is where we get to end in this one, and this is where we open in the next one. So.
Right. Yes. So, I mean, not that, the other guy wasn't in the wrong, but that, Lewis is hard to control. Mm-hmm. It's hard to manage, and it's hard to use as a tool. It's like, if your hammer had splinters all over it, it's kind of hard to use that hammer. That's all I think he was thinking.
I mean, although again, like I said, if you think about it, and to go to the micro analogy, of the missile with the guidance system, you just need to point him in the right direction sometimes. And what the problem for Lewis is that that he didn't have a proper direction to be pointed in, and let's get to Lewis's B story, which was a kind of an interesting thing that struck me in this series, is that we've got this really interesting arc of Lewis's story, that is totally unrelated to everything, but that I think is deserving of the depth that's being given, and it's such an interesting story and take, and that he is this kind of unattached B story to the overall arc of the Punisher. Is perhaps, telling in symbolic about the way the veterans are feeling here, as these people who are being forgotten about and left behind, however they're being forgotten.
I mean, but is he any different than Frank? I mean, what makes him different than Frank? You know what I mean?
Well, Frank would certainly argue that he's different, because Frank would argue he's not crazy.
Well, no, but I mean, do you know if you're crazy or not? Anybody crazy, do they know that they're crazy? No. You can only go based on your assumptions of what you think is wrong enough to kill over. Mm-hmm. And in more situations than not, no matter when you make that choice, you're probably wrong.
This is very true. In this case, yeah, I mean, and to put a point on it, the main difference between Lewis and Frank is that Frank is back in his war.
Oh, he's found his war. This guy hasn't found his war yet. That's interesting.
You know what it is Lewis wanted to be with Anvil because he wanted to go back to war.
Right.
And he knew, and to call a shelter half an entrenching tool here, he knew he couldn't pass the mental status exam to simply re-enlist. Because he didn't have any physical limitation that would prevent him from re-enlisting. Whatever's preventing him from re-enlisting, whatever's preventing him from going back, isn't physical, it's purely mental. Because not for nothing, technology has advanced to the point these days that we actually do have guys out on the lines who have artificial limbs, that they are got that the best of those bionic limbs, and they're going back into the war zone because that's where they feel they have work still to do.
I've even seen exoskeletons that they've created that allow you to bear all your load on the exoskeleton that you're wearing, and you can pick up large pieces of weight without actually being responsible for any of the weight. The sort of exoskeleton holds it up for you, and you can run, and it can help you run longer. It mimics your movement and predicts movements before you actually make them, so it enhances your stride as you're running. There's some pretty powerful stuff out there.
Oh yeah, there's lots of stuff. But actually, I'm just talking like actual. Just more normal things, like just a standard leg below the knee, and there was a guy. I don't know if he. He was on NPR recently, and he was a guy who he lost his leg and went back to Afghanistan, and basically ran his whole area because he knew he had to go back because he felt he had more work to do, and that's a flip side to that story of the guys who do go back, who do reenlist, not because they can't find life outside of war, but because they really feel they have work to do. And so there is another level to this that we maybe don't get in the Punisher story because it is dealing on some of the negative aspects of service and PTSD, which are very real concerns as well. But not every guy who goes and comes back, or even goes and keeps on re-enlisting like Frank did, necessarily came back damaged. What's damaged Frank, arguably, was getting shot in the head, which may have caused all kinds of problems, and watching his family be murdered. I think that was the PTSD that really drove him more than what he faced out in the war zone. Although it is clear that he has a lot of guilt over what he did with Agent Orange. And of course, this is the overall arc here. Now, because I do want to touch on what happens to Lewis in this episode, because Lewis and I'm forgetting the name of the other army guy. Well, the guy who says he was
O'Connor.
O'Connor, yeah. O'Connor go to support some Second Amendment case down at the courthouse, and a cop wants to roust them. And even though Lewis is right on the law and knows everything there is, knows what his rights are, knows what he's doing, as he quickly
and expressed himself eloquently and with respect.
Yes, he did. He did everything right, but as I myself recently learned, police officers do not like it when you express yourself contra to what they want you to do. It doesn't matter how respectful you are. It doesn't matter how in the right legally you are. If they have made a statement and you have countered that statement, they do not cotton to it. And
a lot of cops have a very severe ego sickness.
Well, I will say that this cop could have walked away because the guys weren't doing anything, but he had a very negative feeling towards the idea of people not just giving him his due authority. And cops like that do exist. Not all cops are like that, but cops like that do exist.
Many. I don't know if you can even blame them. Maybe it's just part of in human condition that power in that way will corrupt somebody. We're willing to accept that power corrupts people in the very, very top echelon of society, but even in our regular everyday, if you give somebody a little bit of power, the mind is easily corruptible.
And it goes to, there's actually an interesting idea within, questions about police psychology, and this idea that police, especially city police, are conditioned to see threats. Because they know that if they don't see a threat, that threat can come back at them.
Right.
And so because they're living every day with the sense that anyone could be a threat.
Right.
It's like they say, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, And
right, exactly.
And so and he doesn't know these guys, and they're probably not doing anything wrong. But, for all he knows, they are, some crazy white supremacists. They might be there to cause trouble. He doesn't know, but he wants them to move on because, for whatever reason, he's uncomfortable with what they're doing. And
he's also uncomfortable with the fact that they're pointing out that he doesn't know how to do his job properly. He has no idea what the law really says. At that moment, that guy could have said anything to him, and because he didn't have the knowledge to back up his claims, he would have had to either go with it or do that to the guy. And that's what he chose.
That's what he chose. And as a result, he goes to jail. Lewis goes to jail, and O'Connor runs.
Of course.
Of course. But to O'Connor's credit, he's telling Lewis, this isn't a fight worth having, and to put it really simple to you, they could walk away, get a cup of coffee, and come back 5 minutes later after the cop's gone. The cop knows this, and that's all the cop wanted. And in this kind of a circular, it's very in that Kafka-esque world of guilt and innocence. Oftentimes it's not that the police officer really expects you to stop what you're doing. They just want you to not do it in front of them once they've asked you to stop. So it's like they've said, okay, please stop this. Okay, I stop. The cop leaves. You can come right back and go back to doing it. And the cop knows this, and that, and it's that game that the cop is expecting you to play. When you don't play that game, that's when things, from the cop's perspective, that's where his view is on this. Anyway, because we're spending all this time talking about Lewis. I mean, it's a great story. The Lewis story is a great story. We do find out after Lewis gets out of jail and goes back to Curtis. Because Curtis is really the only stable person in his life who knows what he's going through, and the only person who's really trying to look out for him. And he points out that O'Connor isn't actually a non-vet, that everything O'Connor is saying is basically just balderdash, that he's saying these things, like he served in the military at the time of Vietnam, but he was never deployed.
Right.
He
came home from Texas.
Yeah. Well, exactly. He can join the American Legion. He can't join the VFW. Little known fact that's the difference between if you're any soldier can join the American Legion, but after they leave the service, but only veterans who served overseas can be veterans. And I think you actually had to have fought during a war zone to be considered a veteran of foreign wars. But so
makes sense.
That's the difference between the VFW and the American Legion. I know that just because my father-in-law's a member of the VFW and finds it very nice to go and hang out with other soldiers.
Not bad.
Which I think actually might have been something that this series might have. To have a more balanced view of it is to actually just have a VFW post in it, rather than just being the PTSD support group, actually having, because a lot of guys, that's their support group too, is the bar at the VFW. But that's a whole other bag of hammers. Anyway, side note, other story that goes on in this, Russo and Madani, her boobs have healed apparently.
Right.
ready
But she's still got like these tremendous bruises on her ribs, and like if you've ever had a bruised rib, it hurts to do anything. And she doesn't seem affected by it. And as much and as little as I buy into her injury and her reactions to it, that's as much as I buy into their chemistry. It seems things are like, I feel so awkward when the two of them are on screen together. It just doesn't jive. I feel like they're just like going through the motions and reading their lines at each other. I don't know if backstage they don't like each other or what the deal is, but I do not buy the chemistry with them at all.
If I'm going to make the argument for them, what it is it's two sociopaths having an interaction and behaving in a way that basically they're aping how human interactions are supposed to be. That's why their reaction. That's why the relationship is completely centered around sex. Because they're two people who want to have sex, and so
No, that's exactly what I felt. It was like they were like playing parts, and it seemed obvious. But maybe it was because they don't know how to do it properly, so they're just putting together conglomerates of things they think are expected of them.
I mean, that's how I would take that. I mean, it's also possibly that they're just not, that they just don't have chemistry together as actors. But I think that part of it may be that they both know that their characters are supposed to be that they don't have emotional connections. That these are two people who don't have emotional connections, which, to show you how little Russo has an emotional connection, we see this whole story where he is trying to reach out to Frank Castle. He's doing the whole, Raven, this is Blackbird, whatever it is. And they finally meet, and Russo is offering him, this opportunity. Says, "Come with me. I'll get you out of the country. Well, I want you with me. You can wear a suit. You cannot wear a suit. I can help you, Frank." And he, tells him to meet him at the docks that night, so that he can help him out, get him out of the country. And then, and before we get to that reveal, let's just talk about what happens with Lewis and O'Connor. Because Lewis confronts O'Connor about his stolen valor, about the fact that he is not a actual, that he did not win was not awarded a Silver Star.
Silver Star.
Yeah, Silver Star. He was not awarded a Silver Star. He did not serve in Vietnam, and they get into a fight, and O'Connor pulls a knife and slashes Lewis. But of course, O'Connor is a guy who reasonably could have served in Vietnam and has done no exercises since then. Lewis, unlike Tubby O'Connor, looks like a guy who could have just gotten back from Afghanistan and is ready to fight, and so this fight does go the way you would expect it to, which is that Lewis does kill O'Connor and goes beyond just accidentally stabbing him, which is how it starts, because of course it is O'Connor's knife. Connor goes at Lewis with the knife. Lewis is completely in his rights to fight back, and when the knife goes into O'Connor, I almost thought that Lewis was going to back off at that point, but then Lewis snaps and just starts stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and stabbing, and O'Connor is no more.
Yeah, it's interesting. He mentions something about that later on, where he's sort of searching for the simplicity of, when they're watching the Muhammad Ali fight, he mentions the simplicity of war, where or of fighting, where the person in front of you is your clear-cut enemy, and that is your goal. That is your only job to do, and he longed for that. And the moment that happened, all of a sudden he found a moment where it was very clear who his enemy was, and he just wanted to stay in that moment for a little bit, and he relished in that. Yeah. And you got a little taste of it, like a vampire feeding,
Yeah, and it certainly was a very bloody feast.
Indeed.
And it ends very poorly for O'Connor, and we do see Lewis basically goes to the bathroom and cleans himself up as best he can, and then tears down the shower curtain. Actually, that happens next episode, I think.
Yeah, but what do you think he does with the body? Does he just leave it there, you think, or maybe he buried him?
Yeah, well,
he's good at digging holes.
Yeah, well, that is true. Based on the fact that he does tear down the shower curtain either in this episode or the start of next, I imagine he wraps the body in the shower curtain to dispose of it in some way. How he disposes of it, I don't know, and maybe that's going to come up in later episodes. But speaking of cold-hearted people and murderers of the like, and we were discussing previously, how Russo and Madani are perhaps that one of the reasons their characters may not seem to have a lot of chemistry is because they are playing them as these hardened sociopaths. And we see how much of a hardened sociopath Russo is when, at the end of this episode, he is at the docks waiting for Castle. When Castle doesn't show, Russo gets into his car, and waiting for him is
Agent Orange.
Yeah, good old Rollins is right there waiting for him. Because they were both ready to take care of Castle if they had to. That there are no brothers in this war.
Right. So did you think Frank saw it coming? I mean, it's got to be hard to miss that, Russo would have connections to the CIA and to the shadow government, being that he's running a shadow army. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I don't think so because of what Frank says next episode. Which, spoilers, he does make the point that, he didn't take Russo's offer, but, Russo's offer will still be there once they take care of everything. Now, truth be told, you could argue that he could see maybe Russo is as trapped by these villains as
right, right,
and that he's going to be freeing Russo as much as he's freeing himself.
That and like that he doesn't really think that Russo would actually kill him or hurt his mission or whatever, that beyond all the money and beyond all that, when you serve together, you are brothers. And no matter what situation you find yourself in, push comes to shove, he won't do it. And Rollins says about as much to him in their meeting,
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's something that can be said for that. And again, we're getting into the next episode, so let's put a pin in that. Let's end off tonight's episode. Final thoughts on the Judas Goat. We did not actually even get to mention why it's called the Judas Goat, but that's
right,
okay.
Which was a pretty horrific story.
Yeah, but it
about
makes
what they do to that.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense because how else are you going to learn to do to fix combat injuries?
Yeah, I guess, but is that true? Is that really what they do?
I guess they must. That is not a made-up story. No, I would not. I would imagine that is very much how they would train combat medics. It makes perfect sense to me. I don't know if they give you an individual goat that you name and things like that.
That's intense, man.
But, I would imagine they do something like that. I would imagine that they cycle through a lot of goats. And cows.
I don't know. I mean, it just seems like,
what have you.
dummy and robot technology has, grown leaps and bounds, and I'm sure the military has technology that civilians aren't even aware of. So
but the thing is,
it's a pretty low-tech solution.
You have to be yes, because I don't know how low-tech it is. It took a billion years to develop the technology to make it. To put it simply, what it is you can't fake something being alive or dead.
Yeah. Yeah,
and if you want to know if you saved the goat's life, so you got to know that, okay, because you don't want to be, well, gee, usually when I hit reboot, you can't reboot the dummy or reboot the robot in the war situation. There's no reboot on your soldiers that you're mending up, just like there's no reboot on the goats. So you need something that you can't you need something that you can mess up.
Right.
And that you can see that you did it wrong.
Right. And when he's telling that story, they keep cutting back to Frank lying there all bandaged and bruised up. And, I guess they were calling him the goat, or maybe Micro's goat. Or like somebody's using him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and he makes the point that you can only patch the goats up so many times. And the goats do die because you just can't put a body through this much. And, for what it's worth, that's what Curtis is trying to say here is like, you can't put the Punisher, you can't put Frank Castle through this. He needs to be allowed to end his war. He needs to be allowed to go home. And again, it's moments like that make me think that the revelation at the end is going to be that this was never Frank's war. That maybe he would have still gone after them about the heroin and nonsense, but that the fact of the matter is that I get the feeling they're way beyond the heroin. I thought that was the general's thing, the heroin, the blacksmith thing. I don't think that is in any way what Rollins and Russo are in the middle of. I think they're just straight up, straight up cold warriors, as it were,
Right, and they're just merchants of war, and they make profit off of war, and that's their only game.
Exactly. I think that maybe the heroin was just one small piece of their pie, and I don't think that's, and I do think that's going to be the reveal that they didn't come after Castle's family, but we're going to find that out as we keep on watching. And tune in next week, whenever this airs, because the week after this will be the next episode, which is Crosshairs, which I thought had one of the best final scenes.
Endings? Yeah. Great ending. My God.
But we'll get to that next week. Mozz, how can people find you if they'd like to reach out to you, talk about what punishments they deserve?
He can reach me via email at mozzmanzor@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook under Mozz Manzor. That's MOZZMANZOOR.
And, of course, you can always write to me in that old-fashioned email way the way our Mozz and Paz once said at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, at gmail.com. And, of course, follow me on the Twitters that I live tweet Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when it comes back, and various other things when they come back, when I have the chance to. At Charlie Esser, that's CharlieEssser. Look for the two E's right there in the middle for quality. Go in peace, dear listeners, and sin no more. But we all know you will sin. And when you sin, return here next week and receive your just punishment.